Welcome back. I hope everyone had the chance to visit our exhibitors during the break. And remember that the exhibition hall will be open until 2:30 Central Time. There's still plenty of time to have a conversation with our exhibitors, which represent some of the most leading-edge companies in our industry. We're about to start our last block of the day, focusing on what's happening in e-fulfillment. Bob?
Thank you, Brian. As we all know, the march to more e-commerce fulfillment became a flat-out sprint when retailers were forced to close their stores in the early days of the pandemic. Last summer, I had a chance to speak to about 5 brand name retailers who shared their experiences during COVID. The most common was a massive jump in e-commerce orders, especially for brick and mortar retailers who saw in some instances average daily order volumes that were 2 and 3 times what they would normally see on Black Friday, except it was every day. While some of that demand has ebbed, e-commerce orders are still significantly higher than they were in the past, and there's no sign that that will change at any time in the future. That has retailers thinking about new fulfillment strategies, including buy online, ship from store, pick up in store, and curbside pickup. How then does a retailer successfully leverage its brick and mortar stores to make that happen? At the same time, many of those same retailers are grappling with how to deal with last mile delivery. That's what we're going to dive into over our next 4 presentations. We'll begin with a conversation with Varadish Chanakrishnan, who is the CIO, IT, Supply Chain, and Logistics for Jo-Ann Stores, one of the country's best-known brands for fabric and craft supplies. Varadish has responsibility for IT, supply chain, and logistics. And Jo-Ann Stores has been shipping from its stores for several years now. VC, welcome.
Nice being here. Hello.
Thanks. To get us started, why don't you describe your operations, including the number of distribution centers you operate, the number of stores, and the number of stores that were doing ship from store before COVID, and how you approached e-fulfillment back then.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I will start with explaining some of the things that we used to do and how we actually supported the business and our customers. So we have 3 distribution centers within the country, one more towards the east and one central, and then one on the west side, west coast I meant. And we have around 860 stores. And in fact, we have been doing buy online, pick up in store from pretty much all of the stores for almost, I would say now, the 3rd year running. And we also have made a choice and a decision to do e-com fulfillment from 100 of our stores and also the 3 distribution centers. And we also have a small subset that gets kind of fulfilled from our 3PL or the vendors that we have. Out of the 100 stores, we have around 3 that we call as hub stores because they are larger format stores that carry a lot more products that we sell, more in volume. At the same time, they have the facility to ship more orders, up to the point of even $1,500 orders a day is their capacity. So that's kind of the setup that we have been having for almost a few years now, even before COVID.
Thanks, Varadish. You know, one of the things I found fascinating the first time that you and I spoke is what you just went over, which is that buy online, ship from store was not new to you. So when you made that decision, you know, tell us how that came about and a little bit about your strategy. You know, why the stores? And I do know you do some e-com fulfillment, either drop shipment or from the DC. So just talk a little bit about how that all works for us.
Yeah, sure. So around 95% of our e-com demand is fulfilled from our stores. So I'm talking pre-COVID and even now, actually. Prior to having ship from store, the way we used to cater to our e-com demand was for the most part with a 3PL provider. So when we went ahead and implemented the DOM solution, a few years ago, we went down the path of, okay, first let's turn on buy online, pick up in store, because that is something that our customers were looking for. And first we turned that on. So we went with a pilot, we had added a few stores, and then we went ahead and pretty much did buy online, pick up at store across the chain. And then at that time, we tried to look at what options do we have to kind of get or become less reliant on our 3PL provider, because there's a cost to it and it's pretty expensive to get it done by a third-party provider. So at that time, we were looking at what options do we have. Yes, we do have the distribution centers, but since these distribution centers that we have were designed and built to cater to more the retail fulfillment, meaning that most of the products that we carry are kind of handled and processed in the DC as inner cases or even case packs, because we want to be more efficient to cater to the retail demand. So when we looked at the DCs were not the best option, because now you have to set up a whole new each picking capability and cater to a B2C. But we still can do it on some of the products like, say, sewing machine, because those are not in case packs. Those are individual packages. But at the same time, we do have a lot more other products that we sell in the store. So then we looked at, okay, what option do we have? Then we thought about why not go to the store network, because one, we have the product there. Two, it is closer to the demand, meaning the customer and where they would like it to be shipped. So we made a choice of picking around 100 stores out of the 860 to actually be able to do ship from store. So a combination of, I would say, availability of the product, being in the store, proximity to the customer, and being able to add one more step to buy online, pick up in store, where you have to do the packing to be shipping out the orders. We thought the store would be a better idea to actually bring in more of the e-com fulfillment. And one other piece which is unique to JOANN, which I think you did mention about we being the biggest retailer selling fabric. Think about cutting of the fabric for these e-com orders. In every store, we do have the ability to actually cut the fabric and provide it to the customer. Replicating that in one centralized location would become more like a factory setup you can think of. And also we need to carry pretty much every SKU, every fabric and all of that. So we thought, okay, for us to best utilize our stores and the fabric cutting facility, store is a great fulfillment option. And one last thing, which is very important more than anything else that I talked about, is we carry almost twice as many items or the assortment in the store compared to the DC, because we do quite a bit of direct ship to the store from vendors for many of the products that we carry in the store. So based on all of this, we thought it's, in fact, the best idea for us to go and use our store network to actually do e-com fulfillment and be more reliant on that rather than the DC or a third-party logistics provider or our vendor for that matter.
And it sounds like since you began with buy online and pick up in store, you were developing those sort of pick and pack capabilities in a retail store format that you could just then extend out to, well, I've picked it, I've packed it, now I'm just going to, get it off to UPS or the post office or FedEx, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, you mentioned something, we're going to talk about technology a little bit more in depth and later, but you referenced, I think, something that's pretty important to your strategy, which is that you're utilizing distributed order management, or DOM. You're using a solution from IBM Sterling. And it strikes me that if you're shipping from your store, one, you want to make sure you don't deplete the store of inventory you need for brick and mortar shoppers, right? So you need to have great visibility of that across your network, and then also make that decision about where's the best place to pick and pack from. So talk to us a little bit about first, what does DOM do in your application, and how you utilize it, why it's an important tool to JOANN.
So DOM is the biggest enabler for us to do anything with e-com fulfillment. It starts with having that one system of record for inventory position across the network. So DOM is that system for us. On top of it, we also have, right, as rightly pointed out by you, right, we don't want to deplete the shelves or make a promise for an online customer that we cannot fulfill. So we have set up availability rules also using the DOM solution so that we expose only limited inventory or limited items for that matter in many instances to the online customer so that we can make sure that we can take an order, make a promise, and keep the promise. And also at the same time, we also enabled the sourcing engine and the rules within DOM to actually send a particular order that has been taken online to the store that would be the best choice for us to fulfill from. So we do use DOM for sourcing of an order as well as the orchestration of the order. And the last bit, which is also, again, the most important piece, is the whole process of picking and packing is also enabled through, obviously, handheld device that talks to DOM. So we pretty much kind of use DOM to orchestrate everything from inventory visibility, availability, sourcing, to actually order fulfillment. So it is key part of our whole fulfillment solution.
So something I didn't realize. So it sounds as if, one, you're setting sort of min-max levels in DOM for what you're going to expose so that you have the shelf items that you still need. And then second, it's almost like a warehouse management system within your retail store.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other important piece is also we do set capacities by store because you don't want to actually overwhelm a store with the number of orders that is being sent out. So we also use the, as part of the sourcing engine, capacity by store, because I did talk about the hub store that can do 1,500 orders a day, but there are other smaller format stores that can probably do only 100 orders a day. So we also control how many orders get sent down and also make the item availability based on the capacity available in a store at any point in time.
So that's a pretty important tool for your strategy. So now you've talked to us, we've gotten a good sense of the network and the what is. Let's flash back a little bit. So COVID hits, you're in Ohio. Ohio got hit a little bit hard in the beginning. States begin to clamp down. What was the impact on your stores, and what happened to the volume of e-commerce orders?
Yeah, so when COVID hit, I think we all went through this. Retail stores as well as restaurants, everything were the first ones to close. But it was not the same across the country. There were some states where the COVID cases were high versus the actual rules of how to operate retail was also different. So around the March, April timeframe, we had almost half the chain, the physical stores, closed to customer traffic. So having said that, the demand for a lot of stuff that we sell was still there, because I think you probably figured out by now that we are capable of providing all the raw material that you need for the PPE, like the gowns, the scrubs, and the masks. So since you don't have those readily available and there was a big shortage, there were customers looking for those raw materials to either make it for themselves or to donate. So there was a big surge in customers looking for these products. But since the stores were physically closed and the only option that the customer had was to go online and place an order for those products. Even though there were some states and cities where the store was closed for customer traffic, the local government allowed us to do curbside pickup. So we could actually take an order for a customer to come and pick up. So what we saw was, since we had these products and we had a website that can take orders, we saw 3 times surge in our website traffic compared to holiday traffic. I'm not talking about a regular day or a regular March, April traffic. I'm talking Black Friday traffic. So we had 3 times of that volume and similar number of orders coming through. So I would say that we were stressed across all 3 things that we typically talk about in any business function, right? People, process, and technology. So we had to learn new ways of doing business because our whole corporate has to work from home. The stores are closed, or if it is open, you need to have the safety precautions and policies of how you will actually operate either the store or the DC, both for our teammates as well as for our customers. And from a technology perspective, again, as I said, right, we do not build out systems for 3 times holiday volume, right? So we ended up actually having issues both on the front end on the website, order management, as well as the back end. So there were issues that we had to quickly work through, extend our capability and capacity to actually run these volumes through our systems. And also we had to get creative on the curbside, right? Because most stores, we did not do curbside pickup. We did buy online pickup in store, where we expected the customer to come inside the store and actually get the order picked up. So we quickly were trying to figure out what's the best way to do it. So we came up with a process actually where we sent as part of the email telling the customer, okay, when you come to the store, please call us at this number and we will have somebody bring your order out. So there were a lot of things that we quickly had to figure out and actually work through while we were seeing this kind of heavy traffic online and orders that were coming through our online channel.
Now I know, first, just to give a little shout out to Joanne, you put a Make Your Mask and I think a donation portion of that as part of the program. How many masks were made? It's probably still going on. I know it was at one point it was over 300 million, but what are you up to now, masks that were made through Joanne's initiative?
Yeah, so when we were going through this whole March, April timeframe, and we saw that there was shortage of raw materials that are required for the PPE. So we did get a lot of requests from our own customers, as well as some of the frontline workers and hospital networks of providing that support. And we also, as part of knowing that our customers are makers, right, and would like to actually make to give. So we kind of created a movement, we called it Make to Give, where we donated even to our customers or to any of our other partners, material that is required to make some of these PPE. So what happened right at that time is we set a goal of 100 million masks in a matter of a few weeks. I was just looking at our site. We do update that information. We are at around 370 million masks that has been created and donated by our partners and customers as of today.
Now, we heard a lot about shortages. By the way, that's just a fantastic number. We heard a lot about shortages during COVID, right? And the focus was on things like toilet paper and yeast and so on. But did you experience shortages both in the materials that you sell, but then also the equipment you needed to ramp this all up? And if so, as a supply chain manager, how did you deal with those things?
Yeah, so just because that people wanted everything like the cotton fabric, like the elastic to make the masks or any of the other PPE, we only had limited stock of all of that, right? So we can only cater to so much because obviously we have a forecasting and replenishment system that's looking at how much we sold in the last few years and what we are promoting and all of that. Typical retail, right? So we were out of a lot of these things that our customers wanted. So obviously, as a supply chain person who's also responsible for the logistics and supply chain within Joanne, we had to go find these items from anywhere in the world, connect with our vendor partners who can actually help us find new vendors in new countries, and try to figure out a way to make the purchase and bring the products over. So I would say that there were long night calls with many of the overseas providers, as well as domestic providers for fabric, for elastic, and we even airlifted some of those to actually make it available. Because the whole thing as a business we were all trying to do is how could we support our community, our country, with respect to providing this raw material to help the situation and not worry about what it's going to cost us. So I think this is something that we wanted to do, and we actually spent a lot of effort and time to make it happen.
Thank you. I think we're going to have time for about 3 more questions. So one quick one. We're now 9 or 10 months into this. What's your, you were experiencing a 3 times Black Friday, every day for a couple of months there. What's your average daily volume of orders look like now?
So if I compare to a regular kind of time frame, because we are not talking Black Friday or anything like that.
Right.
So we are anywhere between, I would say, twice or 2.5 times of a regular volume that we would have seen last time this year. So with respect to the number of orders that we process on a daily basis. Because a lot of our customers, even with everything that's, even though all our stores are open, they do have a higher preference to do a buy online pickup in store so that they don't have to come into the store and shop with the rest of the customers, and also get it shipped to their house. So we continue to see high volumes on the e-com platform. So to help that situation, we have actually, in fact, during the April-May timeframe, we added another additional 160 more stores to do ship from store, because that's the only way that we could improve or increase the capacity for us to process e-com orders. So we still continue on that. So we have now, from 3 hub stores, we have now gone up to 7 hub stores. And we have also increased from 100 stores doing ship from store. We are at 260 stores. And we have maintained that kind of numbers even today to cater to the demand that has since COVID happening for us.
One thing that might be interesting for attendees to know, just kind of quick, but the way, and I think it's your hub stores, might be your others, but you kind of flip a switch, right? You do priority picking during the day, but you don't want to interfere with your regular shoppers. So at some point during the day, you flip from a brick and mortar to a warehouse and then pick overnight. Is that correct?
True. So specifically in the hub stores, after 9 o'clock, we have a separate shift that comes in the night. And actually, we use the whole store like a distribution center all through the night until the next day morning. That is how we get those 1,500 orders a day, because during the day, we are probably processing less of those. In fact, we prioritize buy online pickup in store during the day because the customers would like to pick up their orders within a few hours of placing the order. So the priority during the day is mostly buy online pickup in store. And then we flip back into ship from store processing in the night. So yes, that is something that we do mainly in the hub stores, but also is true in the other stores.
Great. Last two, you talked about curbside and that was something sort of new to you. And now in this new abnormal, curbside is going to become, a regular offering as opposed to something we're just doing to get through COVID. So talk a little bit about some of the changes and technologies you're experimenting with to enable, a more efficient curbside.
Yeah, so it's not just we're experimenting, we are fully live with that, and we are pretty proud of what we have been able to achieve because we wanted to provide that technology for curbside pickup to make it seamless for our customers. So yes, as I already said, right, when we went into COVID, we did not have any technology for curbside. In fact, we never did curbside. It was mostly customers coming into the store. So we were looking for a solution that allows us to seamlessly make that whole process happen for our customers. So what we did is we looked for different solutions which would allow us to provide capability for our customers as well as our teammates in the store to actually make this whole handoff of the order to the customer happen in the curbside. So we did pilot a few stores with a new solution that we were able to implement in the last few weeks. And it's almost 2 weeks now that we have the complete chain have this whole technology-based solution where a customer, when the order is ready, gets a message, and then they can click a button that will automatically show them how to get to our store. And at the same time, when they click the button, the store will be notified that the customer is on her way to actually pick up the order. And it will also tell the teammate in the store how long it is before the customer is going to arrive. So the teammate in the store can get the order ready and be ready for the customer to arrive. And also on top of it, even if the customer did not inform us that they are going to be driving up to our store, there's an option for the customer to drive up to one of the marked spots within the parking lot and hit a button, and the system will notify our teammate in the store that a customer has arrived and is looking for this particular order, and also provide information about how to identify the customer, the car, the make, and all of that, so we can easily bring the order out to the customer. So we have been fully live for the last 2 weeks. We are seeing around 20-25% of our customers actually using that solution to actually pick up the order. And we have been having real success in that. We are able to, at an average, get all orders kind of provided and given to the customer within less than 2 minutes. In some cases, in a few seconds, depending on number of customers arriving at the same time. But the average has been around 2 minutes, which has been very much kind of appreciated by our customers.
Last question, Verdish. As a supply chain leader, and particularly one in retail, which has really had to learn how to navigate all these things, what do you think is the most important lesson you've learned going through, this time of disruption that you would pass on to somebody else trying to succeed the way Joanne has?
Yeah, but the biggest thing, in fact, we do cater to our customers to be creative, right? Because that's what we sell, to actually help their creativity that they want to bring. So the one thing that we learned is to be creative, right? You cannot figure out everything ahead of time. So how can we be creative in not just technology solution, but also business process, and also helping our people through whatever they need. The other thing is a collaboration, because retail is all about details, right? But it also requires you to communicate. It is a whole end-to-end process that has to happen from all the way in the corporate office to the store to the customer, right? How do we better communicate? How do we better collaborate with all of the different areas of the business to make everything happen is another learning. And one other thing which we are still trying to look at, it's going to be very important, is the last mile or the local delivery. So we do not have anything right now, but we are going to be looking at that, because yes, we have now provided for the customer to be able to seamlessly pick up orders from our stores, but how could we actually take kind of the whole shipping process to the next level? I know a lot of retailers already do it, but we are trying to figure out what would be the right solution for our customers as well as our organization. Why I say that is, I think you all saw this in the news. All the freight or the carriers had issues when everything was transitioning to e-com, which means that they have to carry a lot of packages to the customers. So we did have the same issue where we were having caps provided by our carrier saying that we can only take so many packages from you, which means that we need a different solution for the local delivery so that we can at least remove some of those packages to go through our typical traditional carrier, but actually use some other option to actually deliver, at least for the local delivery within the market that we serve in the store. So that is one other thing, which is a learning, obviously based on different priorities. This is something that we are going to be focusing on, because I guess, yes, there is things that we want to do with respect to fulfillment and everything, but ultimately there could be issues with getting the packages to the customer. So we want to get creative on that and come up with a solution that works for our customers as well as for us.
Thank you. And Verdish, thanks for being part of the conference and sharing your story. It's just a great success story. And I know that Black Friday is right around the corner. I was married to a retailer, so we'll wish you well on Black Friday. Good luck with it.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. So to our next presentation, with the increase in piece picking and the automation revolution we've been experiencing the last 4 or 5 years, today's warehouse is very different from warehouses of even the recent past. And the warehouse of the future may be right around the corner. Our next presenter, Sumit Chadha, and you'll tell me if I just butchered that, is a principal with the consulting firm Kearney, who will share with us his vision of the warehouse of the future. So Sumit, welcome.
Thank you so much. Are you guys able to hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. I think you got my name almost right, but I'll pronounce it once more for the audience on the phone here. Sumit Chadha, principal out of the Chicago office, and do majority of my work within consumer supply chains. So right from looking at grocery retail upstream to CPGs as well. And majority of the last decade I've spent in this space has been revolving around supply chains, looking at how do we improve our current state, but more so look ahead 5 to 10 years and understand what can be done differently. And future of warehousing, like I said, it's a topic that is front and center for our leadership teams, at least from the client perspective. So what I just wanted to kind of take the next 15, 20 minutes is to really share our perspective, what we're hearing, what we are hearing our clients articulate as their priorities, and more importantly, just leave you with a few thoughts, a few approaches of how you can think about future of warehousing. And like I said, it's been a topic that's been around for quite some time, right? I would say over the past decade or so, future of warehousing was always thought about as some use cases, experiments that can be applied in small settings within the warehouse to see how we can capture efficiencies. But from what we're hearing, this is no longer just a supply chain project. It is front and center, a top 3, a top 5 priority for CXOs across the supply chain. And obviously, as you move towards the consumer within the retail space, maybe a step back in CPG, this is definitely one of the top items. And it kind of becomes important as you think about, what this entails. Like, number one, there is capital available in the market. As you see, the investments have gone through the roof within supply chains, within organizations. But the expectation of what comes out of future of warehousing, aspects of automation, aspects of capabilities that you want to develop have been increasing, right? And in the past, say 6 to 7 years ago, you would imagine that automation or mechanization was always viewed from a perspective of it's going to give us productivity. But now the tone, the narrative is shifting towards business continuity. And like I said up front, that yes, any industry, any company that's closer to the consumer is thinking about it in a big way. But some of the pressures that we are seeing from the consumer and the way the consumer is changing is cascading upstream as well to CPGs. And then before that, even the raw material providers. So the way I think we are trying to articulate the future of warehousing is threefold, right? That we have to think about it from a perspective of capability, from a perspective of efficiency, and no surprises there, from a perspective of resilience as well. So what I want to do is just spend maybe 5 minutes in each one of them, and then we'll talk about how could we approach to think about future of warehousing. So I think the first thing, from a capability perspective, think retail, serving the consumers, the expectations they have from an omnichannel perspective, the growth that we're seeing from a DTC perspective, and then more importantly, serving customers who in turn serve their consumers. So think about what's happening from a CPG perspective, the high OTIF requirements, the high service level requirements, the handling changes, in terms of more layer picks, more case picks. Some of those aspects have to be thought through as you think about what this future of warehousing would look like. And I think it's a given that, in terms of the variety that we are seeing, the hyper-localization at the retail level, the personalization, all of that, what does that really entail for what this future of warehouse would be? Warehouse of the future would be, say, 5, 10, 15 years down the line. And the way we look at it, right, you need slotting for almost 100 to 200% growth of SKUs. There is a move towards having more omni multi-channel operations. Obviously, there's a lot of complexity in the way orders are going to be managed. And lastly, if you think about personalization, NDC kitting, and some of the other value-added services you need, our warehouses of the future will have to plan for that. The next piece, I think, I don't want to spend too much time here. We all know that cost to serve is important. It is something that has been pretty pressured over the last, say, a few years as the volume shifts from your traditional brick and mortar, from your traditional channels to more DTC, anywhere between 3 to 6x increase in cost to serve, which includes both your final mile as well as your warehousing. The piece that we want to talk about is also the game of scale that you're seeing here, right? There is a kind of a disadvantage as you think about your large e-commerce pure play players versus the ones that are on the smaller side. So to what extent are we able to establish that economies of scale to allow some of these technologies to be embedded is something which is a critical challenge as well. And I think the piece which I think is critical here, which I want to really talk about and leave you guys with, is the CapEx and the OpEx, right? Now, there is a balance that had to be had, saying that, hey, I'm willing to invest capital. It's going to lower my OpEx, but where do I draw the line? To what extent do I keep on investing in capital, and at what threshold is the right balance between investing more in automation versus, hey, you know what, I want to live with a little bit of higher OpEx and maybe reserve that capital for some other priorities. And like I said, from a warehouse of the future perspective, what this means is there is going to be a focus on automation and mechanization in a way that you're able to scale up faster. The focus is on modular builds instead of throwing in a lot of money upfront. How can we stair-step our way towards a solution that makes sense? And lastly, in terms of the payback cycles that we are seeing, there is a push towards 2 to 3 year thresholds. Historically, that hasn't been the case, where the expectation was a bit longer in terms of the payback that you would receive. The resilience imperative. Now, I don't think anyone on the call here needs to be educated on what COVID has done for us, right? And I'll share a story with you of what I'm seeing at a couple of clients I've worked at. The Christmas week in grocery, it's usually 80 to 90% higher than an average week, for a retailer. A couple of weekends in March this year, after the lockdowns happened, turned out to be 2x a Christmas week. So you can only imagine what the supply chain, what the stores went through. Now, I don't think there's any company that can plan for that kind of a volume increase, but what resilience means, in my opinion, is your ability to bounce back from those instances, ability to respond to those, right from the ability to look at what's coming in-house. What are the in-transit shipments? Can I divert them? Can I allocate inventory differently to my DCs? And then being able to process them, knowing what's on the truck, able to cross-stock and then get it to the stores directly. That coordination, that orchestration is what resilience is about. So as you think about what that warehouse of the future is going to need, you will need multi-node connectivity. Hey, can I allocate inventory differently from DCs? Can I cross-ship, merge in transit? What kind of visibility do I have? Is there a way to have a centralized control tower that allows me to really monitor what's happening in my network? And then finally, I don't think all of this can be done alone. So having that ecosystem of supply chain partners, 3PLs, 4PLs, and to a certain extent, if you have any shared use networks, bringing them along and saying that, hey, this is what my preparedness or my business continuity plan is for aspects that I have no control over at this point. So those are the three aspects which I said, there's a capability aspect, there's an efficiency, and a resilience aspect. And as we get to the future of housing, like I said, I wanted to, for a moment, I want the team to take kind of a broad look at what warehouse of future of warehousing would look like. So this definitely an aspect on what that role of the DC is, because prematurely thinking about what goes inside the box and not understanding the role of the DC in the broader network kind of sets you up for a suboptimal outcome. Associate of the future, I think we all know how constrained the manpower is right now. So how do we adapt to the evolving workforce? Second is the technology of the future. I think this is the space which I think there's a lot of conversation around the MHE, the automation, the use cases that exist across all aspects of warehousing, but understanding what is that fit for purpose solutions, how do we embed flexibility, modularity is kind of important as well. The piece that I kind of spoke about in the previous slide, the orchestration, this is where I think thinking about it's not just the assets that give us the competitive advantage, it's being able to link those assets, being able to seamlessly orchestrate fulfillment is a critical aspect as well. And the final one, the platform of the future, this is more of a provocative point, and I would want to talk about this towards the end of this discussion, is to really think about supply chains broadly across different companies. Is there a case to build modularity in the supply chains so that supply chains can interact, work together in a much more cohesive way than some of the operations that we see today, where we are not even able to leverage say extra capacity that would exist in our neighboring DC's company's warehouse. So let's kind of step through one by one here, right? So in terms of future role of the warehouse, like I said, really understanding the context around what that DC or the warehouse does in context of the network strategy is important. And what we are seeing broadly, if you think about how DCs are evolving and their role is evolving, there are two dimensions really. There's a proximity to demand and there's the role that you play in the network. Your large regional fulfillment centers, they are moving closer to demand. You are seeing a lot more dark stores, a lot more micro fulfillment centers, which are in the urban locations, being able to serve demand, overnight or potentially even the same day. Your traditional mix centers, which were catering to more store delivery and your customers' DCs, those are evolving to either become more large upstream multi-role DCs, which can hold a lot more of that slow-moving assortment. And on the other hand, trying to move some of those DCs closer to demand centers as well. And for CPGs, that would be your customers' DCs. And for the retailers, that would be more on your stores. And then finally, if you think about the flow and the cross-stock role that DCs play, traditionally, a lot of the consolidation happened at the ports and some key points within the country. There's a lot more emerging transit happening nowadays, where shippers are leveraging ability to bring inventory from multiple locations, merge it, and cross-dock it quickly to your demand centers. So given what is happening from a role perspective, it's really important to understand for whichever warehouse we are focusing on, what is that role it's going to play? Is it going to be a multi-role DC? Is it going to be focused predominantly on customer fulfillment? And what aspects of value-added services, what aspects of packaging, returns processing have to be brought in as a capability before you really think about what goes inside the box? Moving on to associate of the future, and it's almost intentional on my part to talk about associate of the future before we talk about technology of the future. Reason being, if you think about what role would associates and parcel play over a long period of time, I believe associates are here to stay. Full lights out automation has existed in some aspects of supply chains, where there's a predominantly either a case pick or a pallet pick operation, where you can reduce the dependence on the associates to a great extent. But as you move towards break pack, some of the highly manual intensive each pick packaging operations, the technologies aren't there yet to be able to justify the investment, to be able to justify the productivity that you would get out of them. So to a great extent, in the next 5, 10, even 15 years, we do see associates playing a big role in operations. And keeping that in mind, if you think about what the associate is nowadays, right? Obviously, warehousing roles have never historically been a first choice career path. It is more of a transitionary career path for the associates. But the associates are thinking about more or less like a consumer. They want flexibility. They want a purpose from their jobs instead of just looking at it from a transaction perspective. So keeping all of those things in mind, the way we are articulating what this associate of the future would be like, there's an aspect of understanding the career path and the upskilling they need. So how do we give them the option to move within the operations roles, get to leadership technical roles? How do we upskill them to move towards technology, to move towards MHE handling within a warehouse? Like I said, flexible and purposeful workplace. How do we bring in flexibility in schedules? How do we bring in that sense of purpose, ownership of some of the tasks that they do for the consumer? And then a couple of other ones that I briefly want to talk about is the on-demand, always available workforce. Gig and temporary staffing is going to be pretty predominant over the next few years. As you think about ability to manage those personnel, schedule labor, being able to understand how do you really move these associates around to bring flexibility in your inbound, outbound operations, that is going to be a focus as well. And some of it, yes, is enabled through systems, better labor planning, but to a great extent is about how you set up your infrastructure, how you set up your policies to be able to attract, retain, and develop the talent. And now moving to the technology of the future, which I believe is the one that is the most capital intensive. And the way we look at solutions is, a warehouse of the future is not going to have point solutions. that are all clubbed together. It's about having solutions that make sense for that specific operations, whether it's case pick, pallet pick, each pick. And there are, the way to evaluate solutions would be, you've got the adoption, looking at the emerging and the established, as well as to what extent of the warehouse cost base is being addressed, right? So to a great extent, there is a fair bit of adoption from a storage systems, conveyance solutions, and the sortation systems. Some of the emerging ones, like the vision wearables, drones, AR, they are emerging. They address a smaller cost base, but again, over the next 5 to 10 years, you would potentially see them move more towards the right to being more established. The view on MHE automation, like I said, ROI expectations are going up. From an objective standpoint, automation no longer viewed as just productivity. It is equally critical for business continuity and capability. And I think the other piece which is important as well is approach that some of the clients that I've seen take is thinking about automation in terms of modularity, thinking about automation in terms of something that's scalable even in brownfield settings. And that is an important point, because as you think about laying out the roadmap, laying out the footprint, your blueprint for warehouse of the future, you have to have solutions that either would need greenfield and to a certain extent will serve the purpose for brownfield locations as well. Let's move on to the next one, which is the orchestration. And this is, in my opinion, a pretty important topic. And as you look at the market winners and how they differentiate, I believe that the advantage is going to come from the digital capabilities, the execution that shippers do, as physical assets achieve parity. Because once assets are established, what really would bring about the orchestration is how do you really get aspects of your supply chain upstream, downstream, interact with your warehouse systems. So right from being able to have one enterprise inventory across your network, being able to allocate supply as and when needed, to the point where you have real-time shipment information coming into your DCs, being able to understand what's on the truck, what's in the yard, and being able to use that to inform your scheduling for the inbound, inform your cross-stock operations, inform even what's going out of your DC. And from an order perspective, like I said, the orders are becoming smaller, orders are becoming more complex. So the ability to have rule-based multi-node fulfillment is critical, because you're not going to have all the inventory in one location, but how do you leverage your inventory pool across different nodes to be able to merge in transit as and when needed for those specific orders. And then looking ahead in terms of transportation, the shipments that go out to the DCs of your retailers or potentially to your consumers, there is an aspect of how dynamic your order weaving can be, so that you're able to get to more frequent deliveries versus the static setup that you would have traditionally in your warehouses. And finally, this is a topic that I've done a bit of research and I'm really passionate about. And I think for the sake of being provocative, the question I would ask as the team here is, what's preventing us from really interacting with our with our other shippers in the market to be able to share, to be able to utilize capacities that would exist in our network, right? Now, I'll give you a quick example. Speaking to an operator in the Southeast, and and he happened to have a neighboring DC which had almost a complementary peak schedule, and they were looking to have some shared use, utilize some of the subleasable space and maybe a few racks in their neighboring DC, and it took them around 4 to 6 months to be able to get to do that, right from aspects around the legal, the aspects around liability, aspects around systems. So what is preventing retailers, shippers, for that matter, to be able to leverage each other's space in a matter of months and a matter of weeks versus spending so much time in setting that up. So I believe there's a clear case for shared distribution assets, being able to build scale, being able to monetize capacity better, and obviously monetize capability. If you have at-scale operations in each pick, how do we bring on additional shippers who may not have that capability on our platform? And like I said, there's structural challenges. There is a fair bit of differences in how systems operate. So being able to integrate them, being able to look across WM, order management systems, there are legal, commercial aspects that have to be addressed as well. And finally, the clarity on ways of working, the clarity on costs, the allocation rules, some of those aspects have to be kind of thought through as well to see if there's a possibility to have a platform in the future where shippers can start unlocking value by either monetizing their assets or to a certain extent forming consortiums, JVs, to really bring about a shared use supply chain. And this is one topic which I believe does shape the thinking around the warehouse of the future, because the way we set up what your MHE requirements are, the way we plan for additional space, the way we plan for our systems has a big bearing on how some of these platforms could come to life as shippers start thinking about interacting with each other in a non-competitive way. So that was predominantly the content I wanted to share with the team here. I know it's been quite a rush here, but just wanted to highlight some of the key aspects of what is driving the narrative, the discussion on the warehouse of the future, and to a certain extent leave you with some thoughts of how do you structure your discussion in your organization on the future of warehousing. And the way I think we look at it is it all starts with understanding what is the nature of demand that you have. So thinking about the demand in the next 10 to 15 years, what's the product mix, what's the channel mix, what kind of customer needs do we have in terms of product handling, in terms of packaging, and really understanding the speed requirements as well. And then from that point on, really understanding the supply chain needs. So how do you translate those business requirements to aspects around what flows do you need, what DC four-wall capabilities, as well as clarity on the own versus buy decision, because that has a bearing on how you would really think about having that capability in-house versus leveraging shippers, 3PLs, 4PLs that are available to you. And then the third piece, really thinking about the solutions. And I've seen clients really take an unconstrained view of all the point integrated solutions that exist, really interacting a lot with the MHE OEMs, startups, providers, and really understanding how do those solutions map to each of the DC processes, and being able to develop those conceptual use cases and setting up digital twins to be able to simulate and understand the impact of those solutions before you actually go ahead and start implementing it. And then, like I said, capability, efficiency, and resilience is kind of the approach that can be used to really understand how do those solutions apply to your warehouse of the future. And then finally, thinking about it in a very pragmatic way to understand how we can pilot DCs, how we can start small, but being able to move towards the future vision you've set of what that blueprint looks like for warehouse of the future. So yeah, just want to leave you with that. It's like I said, it's a topic I'm very passionate about. Happy to have further discussions, but open it up for the questions here.
Thank you, Sumit. I'm a little short on time, but there was a question or two I wanted to ask you. Like you, I've been really fascinated by the whole idea of the platform, or almost like warehousing or order fulfillment on demand. And there's a couple of initiatives out there. One is the physical internet that Benoit Montreux, now at Georgia Tech, came up with, and is kind of being used in Europe, has had less success here in the US. I also had a conversation with a chief supply chain officer for a retailer who has this notion he calls it supply chain 4.0. It's exactly as you described, shared assets, from everything from the warehouse to transportation. So I've wondered two things. One is, as you envision it, you're studying this, how's it different from a 3PL, number one? And then it seems like one of the barriers is the either I don't want to share with my competitor or the what's in it for me. So how do we, how does it differ from a 3PL as you look at the relationship? And then how do you overcome that what's in it for me barrier?
Yeah, no, that is a fundamental question that we try to answer as well, right? 3PLs, 4PLs have add tremendous value to supply chains. They have a role to play. They are the aggregators of demand, if you will. But there are instances where, large asset owners, you think about the large DSC providers, the large CPGs, the large retailers, they have those assets in-house.
Right.
But there are always pockets of capacities, always pockets of capability that they're able to monetize, or at least it's available to be monetized. So to some extent, the route of getting 3PLs in for that small volume and leveraging them to monetize it is not always efficient, because it's almost a three-way setup that you would want between 3PLs and the shipper and your operations. So to a great extent, like you mentioned, there are, and I call it Airbnb of warehousing, right? There are these platforms that are able to leverage some of them, but to a great extent, they're leveraging space. They may not leverage the capability that would exist in terms of being able to sort, being able to package. So that's where I believe the opportunity lies, is really being able to share the capabilities across different retailers, across different shippers. And the second point which you make is, yes, to a great extent, these partnerships make sense in a non-competitive way. So you wouldn't have two shippers with the same products in the same category trying to merge it together. But to a great extent, if you have a paper manufacturer working with a food company, there are options that exist. And like you said, Europe has had a few of these examples, well-known ones. The setup or the time it took to establish those and the infrastructure around it was, in a way, prohibitive. It has worked, but to a great extent, it really dissuades or discourages people or shippers in other countries to be able to do that. So there's a cost to be made to bring them together, have more of a consortium platform view, so that there are common protocols and more of a platform thinking that can be built upon in the future.
So one of the other things I wondered, going back to the platform, so when I spoke with this particular retailer, his concept was, the more you contribute, then the more you're going to get out of this. In terms of assets, or whether it's on the transportation side, excess warehousing capacity, whatever it may be. But what I started wondering is, who takes the lead? Because then it's almost a 4PL kind of relationship, but it's not a 4PL. And trying to figure out who would take the lead on this, because somebody's got to oversee it, right?
And the way I would phrase it is, right, you need an anchor, right? You need an anchor company who really takes and designs what this setup would look like. And then using that anchor company, you would have other participants who would come in and leverage those capacities. So yes, in a way, it is a 3PL setup, but to what extent do you want multiple entities involved is a question to be had. And again, it all depends upon how does a company look at the capacity that they have? Do they see that as a capability advantage versus something that's more of a utility that can be offered to other shippers? But you're right. I think it has to start with one anchor client rather than trying to bring together equals, if you will, into a partnership.
One last question, because I just got one from one of our attendees who sort of likens it. He says, would this be sort of like an ecosystem commerce platform such as E2Open, Infor, Nexus, One Network, Coupa, Ariba, except that now we're talking about physical distribution as opposed to a control tower kind of thing?
Exactly. I mean, what the companies that you just mentioned, they've done a great job in terms of standardizing the protocols on how transportation systems, ordering systems interact. But what doesn't exist is how do you interact with, say, WMS? How do you interact with, with your inventory systems? That gap has still to be filled to be really able to get a protocol or a standardized way of how supply chains could work with each other. So yeah, it's getting there. It's just that there are a few gaps from a value chain perspective that are yet to be addressed from a standardization perspective.
Personally, I find this a really exciting topic, and I'm going to talk to you about this some more offline. Thank you, Sumit. We're going to move on to our next presentation. So the explosion in e-commerce orders that we just heard Veridish Kannakrishnan from Joann Stores touch on earlier in this block has something else going on. There's an explosion now in last mile delivery. Transportation has always been a significant cost center in e-fulfillment. But these new volumes mean that it's, before then, the volumes meant that it was manageable. But now those costs are becoming unmanageable. They're forcing retailers and e-tailers alike to figure out ways to navigate the space. As a former UPS executive, Alan Amling, our next presenter, has lived last mile delivery. Today, Alan is a distinguished fellow at the University of Tennessee Supply Chain Institute, and he's the CEO of the consulting firm Thrive and Advance. And now he's making a study of this. One real quick note, this was pre-recorded, so there won't be any live questions, but let's bring on Alan.
Okay, it's great to be with all of you today, albeit virtually. I'm going to talk today about a subject that has really consumed me over the last year, as it has many of you, and that's the last mile and the disruption and change that's going on in last mile logistics. You know, in 2015, I did a TED Talk called The My Way Highway. And in it, I talked about pigs are flying and this idea that that'll happen when pigs fly. And I was talking about all of these kind of connecting and thinking technologies, how social media was empowering people. And you had at that time all of these new technologies that were giving consumers the greatest source of power since the dawn of time. And that was information. And at the time, I argued that it was going to change everything. And little did I know, while I thought it was going to change a lot of things, everything has changed much more broadly and quickly than I thought. And if you think back, 2015 isn't that long ago, but e-commerce was 7.5% of retail. Today, it's over double that. So it took 20 years to get to 7.5%, 5 years to more than double that. You know, things like TikTok hadn't been launched. And when you talked about Zoom, it meant to go fast. Amazon stock was like 600. And I remember thinking, well, how much higher can it go? Shopify had just gone public for, I think, $17 a share. And if you look at both of those companies, Amazon is up since that time, I think 4 times, and Shopify like 17 times. And also in 2015, Bill Gates had another TED Talk, and he talked about the lessons from Western Africa's 2014 Ebola crisis, and said that the US and other countries were not prepared for the future pandemic that was going to hit them. He was right. And so we're in the middle of this together right now, but one thing's for certain is that COVID-19 accelerated e-commerce 5 years in the last 5 months. You may even argue that it was even more than that. You think about in just the second quarter of 2020, Walmart's e-commerce sales were up 97%. Target up 195%. Best Buy up 242%. You know, albeit not off the largest base, but these are incredible growth figures, and we saw it across the retail industry. And it impacted the carriers. UPS and FedEx were about 70% of their volume was B2C, and that's flipping the script on where it was like 5-10 years ago, where it was 70% B2B. And a lot of different business models have cropped up as a result of this, as businesses have been scrambling and trying to get their footing during this pandemic and dealing with this, massive growth of people have shifted how they purchase goods. And two of the big drivers of the change that's going on right now is, Walmart and Amazon. Collectively, they make up about 50% of e-commerce in the U.S. And, they've made some significant moves over the last year. Walmart, as you know, they launched Walmart Plus just a couple months ago, actually. And I read a report, 11% of Americans signed up for Walmart Plus in just the first 14 days after launch, 11%. And that's all about fast delivery. So for groceries, if you're in the area of one of their ship from store locations, could be same day, and they extend it beyond groceries to other items as well, other select items. And obviously, as they get more comfortable, that's going to grow. Amazon, on the other hand, they took their Prime their Prime commitment from 2-day to 1 day. And that's significant as well. There's 112 Prime members in the United States. And just to put that in perspective, that's like 1 out of every 3 adults in the United States is a Prime subscription member. And both these companies are making same day and next day delivery, pillars of their value proposition. Both are investing millions to make that happen. What's the other 50% of e-commerce in the U.S. Going to do? And that's where a lot of change and a lot of innovation is happening right now. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about. But, one thing is for certain, and that is when you see trends in consumer behavior trends, they often don't go in reverse. So as customers are getting used to quick delivery, they expect it now. It wasn't that long ago that same day delivery was like, are you kidding me? Yeah, that's quite a luxury. That's quite a niche, or even next day delivery. And excuse me. And now that is becoming an expectation. And is it possible that consumers will go back to being okay with 2 to 5 day delivery as a standard if they're properly incented? Maybe, but it's not likely. So, and this changes everything. So not only do you have this avalanche of more e-commerce shipments, but you have this changing consumer behavior to, I want it now. And it's like consumers always want what they want, when they want it, where they want it, at the lowest possible price. But now the expectation is that it's delivered quickly. And when you think about the 2 to 5 day delivery world, you have the ability to have regional distribution centers. So like I'm showing in this slide, maybe you have 3 regional distribution centers or or possibly 5. In a same day, next day world, that's really tough, because even next day, if you've got these regional delivery centers that I have laid out here, even if it's next day, if you're going to the Northeast or you're going somewhere in the Northwest or Southern California, you have to fly it. That's way too expensive for most e-commerce deliveries. So you have to have the products near customers. So you go from 3 distribution centers now to hyperlocal fulfillment of 100 or more, albeit shared distribution centers most likely. But this changes everything. You have to have products stored nearby, and it has lots of implications. But one of the key points that I want to make in this presentation is, remember, local pickup and local delivery changes everything. When products are available for local pickup, the impact on today's supply chain, up and down the supply chain, is substantial. And here's 2 key areas. First, instead of needing a last mile carrier with a national network, there are dozens of options in each locality, whether you're talking about contractors, couriers, gig workers, or even your own employees. If it's a local pickup, local delivery, it kind of changes the equation. The next thing is inventory placement becomes the key to profitability. We used to talk about efficiency and density, and all of that's really important. But in this new world, inventory placement is absolutely critical. And any supply chain professional will tell you that inventory is the devil. Inventory holding costs will kill you. Well, what happens when you have that left-handed widget that used to have to store in 3 locations, and now you've got 100 locations or 200 locations? You need to be very smart about where your products are placed and when. And what's the key to that? Artificial intelligence, machine learning. Those are the key enablers of good predictions of correct inventory placement. And Amazon and Walmart, who I talked about earlier, are experts at this. But this is an area that if you want to move towards hyper-local fulfillment, you have to get good at this. This is something that you're absolutely going to need to shore up. I just wrote an article about this that was published in the Wall Street Journal last week. And in this article, I talk about that the carrier strategies need to change, but it's actually much broader than that. It's not just the carriers, it's the manufacturers, it's the retailers, it's the 3PLs, and yes, it's the carriers as well. You have these new last mile fulfillment models are taking shape, and in my 30 years in logistics, it is just absolutely fascinating to look at this from an academic at the University of Tennessee, and taking my professional experience and the interviews that I've done with supply chain leaders and looking at all this change. Just it's absolutely unbelievable. Ship from store, it's crazy. So Walmart expanded over 2,500 stores, Target to over 1,000. There's a lot of retailers that for the very first time during this pandemic started to use ship from stores, really started to leverage their physical infrastructure as a real asset against the online only competitors. Curbside pickup. At the end of 2019, there were only 19 of the top 500 retailers offering curbside pickup. By August of this year, it was 121. And then you have all these new hyper-local fulfillment companies, the Fabric, Dark Store, Stored, Flex, and technology companies like Takeoff Technologies that are all getting into this space. In the lower left, you see an Amazon delivery station. That's how they're competing with the 2,500 stores that Walmart is doing ship from store. They're really expanding their local presence. And so if you look at that picture, one of the things you see is you see the Flex drivers. So out of these delivery stations, they operate both their contractors, which is Amazon Logistics, and their gig workers. They already have about 400. They plan to have about 400 of these delivery stations by the end of the year, and reports are that they plan to expand that to 1,000 or even 1,500. So that's really changing the landscape. And then you have mall space that's turning into distribution centers. You have tremendous innovation in the grocery industry, from Ocado to stores allocating more space for fulfillment of curbside and delivery orders. I know my mom started doing curbside pickup during the pandemic for groceries, and she loves the convenience. After the pandemic, she's never going back. And while I think some consumer behaviors are going to go back to the way they were pre-pandemic, there's a lot of changes that have been happening that are going to stick. So you've got new entrants gaining foothold. You've got, I thought it was crazy, Target in 2017 purchasing Shipt for $550 million. It doesn't look so crazy now that Uber purchased Postmates for $2.65 billion. DoorDash and Instacart are over $16 billion. DoorDash and Instacart, really? Yeah, they're becoming significant competitors. And then you've got these on-demand warehouse providers like Flex and Stored and FlowSpace, Dark Store, that have collectively raised over $120 million. These are all new competitors in the logistics landscape that if you're an incumbent 3PL, if you're an incumbent carrier, you need to pay attention to these companies because they're growing and they're innovating, they're becoming a force to be reckoned with. The other thing that I think is really interesting is sharing infrastructure is becoming mainstream. And so I talk about the Overton window, which is this idea that, was, I think, popularized in political spectrums where ideas that are kind of on the fringe or unthinkable or radical over time can become acceptable, sensible, and mainstream. And the companies that understand which of these radical ideas are going to become mainstream are the ones that get a jump on their competitor. And one of these ideas that has been around for a while is called the physical internet, and it was developed by a Georgia Tech professor named Dr. Benoit Montreux. And I read about this when I was at UPS, very interested in it. And the idea is that just like in the internet where packets of information flow freely and frictionless and get switched from point A to point B, that you could do that with supply chain, with physical assets, but you would have to, share infrastructure with different supply chain participants. As a asset owner, maybe not as popular because you don't want to share your toys with others, but it is becoming more mainstream, and you see more sharing models with established asset owning companies. And I bring this up because it's one of the trends that you're going to need to look at. So the way forward. So I'm not going to give you the 8 steps to do this or these technologies you should adopt because it's very context specific, but I really want to talk about mindsets, like 3 mindsets, ways that you should be thinking. And in all of my research and discussions, the companies that are winning in this environment have the right mindsets. And if you start with the right mindset, your actions will create a virtuous circle. And if you don't, it's just innovation theater. And so what are these 3 mindsets? The first is go on offense. And this is a quote from Hermann Balck, who was a general of the Panzer troops. And the U.S. gathered valuable information on military strategy, interviewing German officers at the end of World War II. And one of the most celebrated was a guy named Hermann Balck, who, and the thing that he's most known for is he led an attack on the Soviet 5th Tank Army on the Eastern Front. He was outnumbered 11-1 in tanks, and outnumbered in military, or in the infantry, and he did it by novelty, by repeated thrusts. He went on offense, 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 and it's a lesson to learn. Everyone has to get their footing, but if you're a 3PL, you need to be experimenting with hyperlocal fulfillment, with mobile delivery hubs. You need to leverage existing relationships. You need to take advantage of your strengths, bundle prices of current services with new offerings. If you're a carrier, do not cede the fast-growing local delivery market to startups. Create unexpected partnerships with other supply chain participants, and move upstream to create new revenue streams. And if you're a retailer, continue to leverage your physical footprint, your brand, your strong customer relationships, and lean into the changing consumer behavior. Go on offense. Do not get on roller skates. And then build snowmobiles. This was an idea put forth by Colonel John Boyd. I'm not going to get into the origins of it, but it's essentially an analogy for high adaptability. So what assets do you have that could be reconfigured to attack a new market? So an idea would be Fujifilm. Where Kodak was trying to monetize its R&D in its core film business, Fujifilm looked at what are our assets and where could they be applied in different industries. So they used their nanotechnology experience for placing chemicals onto films, for instance, and applied that to applying cosmetics to facial skin. They took their experience in photosensitive materials and helped it with move into the fine chemicals and industrial materials industry, which now makes up the majority of their revenue. And so these things are really important. And last but not least, make lives better. And it's just, yes, it is about the customer, but it's also understanding, how do you make their lives better? Take this opportunity to reassess the value you provide to your customers. How do you help them solve for insufficient wealth, access, skill, and time? And as the late, great Clayton Christensen said, what are their jobs to be done? If you're busy selling what you have and not listening to what your customers tell you, you're going to be in trouble. The market votes with its wallet and will force anyone out of business who doesn't meet its needs. And that's certainly as true now as it has ever been. So with that, if we have time, I'll take questions.
Thank you, Alan. That was a great presentation. I was thinking back to a visit I did last February, pre-COVID, to an Amazon distribution center at one of their robotic centers in New Haven. And they had 1 million SKUs, but only 3 million items, which meant they had a whole lot of things where they only had one example, right? 40 miles away, they had another 1 million square foot facility with 1 million SKUs that didn't duplicate the 1 million in New Haven, and 3 million items. And what struck me, because we talked while I was there about their whole network, from receiving at the port to distribution centers that redistributed to the order fulfillment centers. They've built this huge network designed to replenish, not just to pick at the item level, but to replenish at the item level. If you're only carrying one item and you're going to replenish your maximum level, that's one item, right? It's a pretty remarkable thing, and it sort of drives home your point about how you allocate that inventory is going to be key.
Yeah.
The one thing that occurred to me when I was listening to this, I've had the opportunity to talk to a bunch of startups in the logistics area and in the warehousing area, doing hyper fulfillment, a 3,000 square foot warehouse in a shopping center, and all the platforms for last mile delivery. And then you add on to that talking to the retailers in the pandemic who talked about how they've just shifted everything to ship from store. And I keep wondering, is it sustainable? It's like we're all going to be Uber drivers. Are there enough people to do all this demand for local delivery? And maybe maybe it's a question not unlike when we said, well, how high can Amazon go? But is this a sustainable model going forward?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting because when you think about all of these kind of Uber type models, they require excess capacity, right? Because think about the Airbnb for warehousing type models. They require that there is some warehouse somewhere that has space that hasn't been allocated to something else. So I think there are limits to these new models, and what's going to be interesting is how all that plays out. So how does the ratio of asset ownership to digital only models, how does that all play out? We don't know right now. The one thing that we absolutely do know is that the rising customer expectations are not going to subside, and companies are going to have to be really agile in how they adjust to it. And I think it's going to be a more I don't want to say a fragmented supply chain, but it is going to take multiple parties operating in unison, which is why this idea of coordinating assets and through technology is going to become really a key skill in the supply chain and separate the winners from the losers.
Great, thank you. That's going to be all the time we have today, Alan, but I really appreciate the presentation today. Thank you for sharing with us, and we will see you again.
Okay, thanks a lot. It's been great. Take care.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. The TED Talk that Alan referred to is available on YouTube. I've watched it there. If you have some time, check it out. I think you'll find it really interesting. He's a great speaker. We're coming up to our last presentation. If you were around for the start of the e-commerce revolution about 15 years ago, you might remember a UPS commercial. A young startup e-tailer goes online for the first time. The website goes live, and they all cheer when they get their first order. Half a minute later, they're buried in orders, and it dawns on them, how are we ever going to fill all that demand? The real question they're asking is, how do we build a startup supply chain? Yesterday, we heard from Julian Cunahan about startup technology companies in the supply chain. Krutin Shah, our next presenter, is a partner at N Squared Partners, but before that, he was responsible for building a startup supply chain at Adore Me, a disruptor in the women's intimate apparel space. He's going to share with us some of his lessons learned. Krutin, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here, and excited to share my learnings over the last 3 to 5 years and just talk through what has e-fulfillment turned into. Before I jump into that, just wanted to give you a brief background about me, expand a little bit more about what Bob iterated to. So I started off in management consulting many years ago, then sort of decided to jump in, get my hands dirty and build a e-fulfillment network or distribution center for Adore Me. This was all about bringing insourcing from a 3PL, building a highly automated facility, doing what was cutting edge 3 years ago. And then now, recently I've pivoted and started working with multiple e-commerce companies, supply chain tech companies that are thinking about very rapid way as they're encountering challenges. So my presentation is more about the framework that e-commerce companies and even traditional retailers that are looking to build an e-fulfillment network can use to think through this process. Now that before jumping into this, just to be a question, like what is 2020 all about from a supply chain perspective? Who drove the transformation there? And clearly the answer isn't, the traditional answers that we would look at. It has been COVID-19. And that's become the new normal for many of these companies. And that has accelerated the growth of e-commerce and, traditional retailers are also rushing to build and improve their existing fulfillment network. Primarily, this has driven what I call the three things driving this. One is sort of the consumer and the COVID factor, right? People are focusing energies on online and omni-channel sales. There have been massive spikes in e-commerce sales between April and August. Some even say sales during that period have eclipsed what would have been a Black Friday, Cyber Monday sales in the previous years, etc. Definitely, rise there has created a this is also during the period that traditional retailers would have considered slow period. So they were not expecting, but they were not knowing how to handle this increase in sales either. Also, this has resulted in a painful phenomena of returns going through the roof for some of these players as well. And this has all sort of put a strain on their fulfillment network or their capabilities that they had, whether that was outsourced to 3PLs, 4PLs, or they were doing it themselves. The other factor that has been playing for now quite some time has what I call the Amazon effect, right? Amazon went from 2-day free shipping to 1-day free shipping. Now, in certain cases, they deliver you within a certain number of hours. And that is extremely expensive if you're a startup for you to compete with Amazon on those levels. As well as there are more sort of, marketplaces that are wanting to do that and doing that as well, which is making it, again, sort of e-fulfillment network, sort of a centerpiece of the success for e-commerce companies as they sort of look to how do we continue to either move towards profitability or maintain our margins and remain profitable. The other factor that a lot of companies are starting to face is the labor factor. The labor market has been pretty tight, and the wages are obviously on the rise. That has resulted in, again, companies looking closely at their bottom line are starting to wonder what's going to happen. How are we going to, how are you going to continue to remain profitable? How are we going to find labor when that market is so tight? And those have definitely led into things that DCs or 3PLs are thinking about more and more about automation. That makes the case for automation a lot more easier as well for them. So having seen all these factors, when I speak to a lot of companies these days, the question comes, how do we go about this process? We want to do it ourselves, or we want to go build a network. We want to go partner with multiple 3PLs or one 3PL with multiple locations, etc. How do we go about? So I thought let me put together a framework on how do you evaluate your path forward. This is probably for a lot of these e-commerce and traditional retailers, some of the highest investments they're going to do this year or in the next few years is going to be in this supply chain, is going to be in this fulfillment network. So sort of thinking about this framework and putting a perspective on it was first to keep in mind what is the understanding of your need versus what you're desiring. A lot of times we've found that need does not equate desire and vice versa. and doesn't necessarily always mean that desire is always encompassing need either. So in order to truly get the right foot, you need to really understand what your need is and what your desire is. Then will come the understanding of your ability to execute. And we'll touch upon this a little bit more detail on a later slide, but this ability is not just financial ability. A lot of people mistaken that, oh, we have the capital to do it, or we are capital constrained, so we can't do it. There are a lot of other factors also go into that ability to execute. Once these two pillars are sort of solidified, then is the true design decisions and factors that go into that, come in. Jumping into design before understanding, your need, desire, ability, in a lot of cases is premature, and sometimes that results in a lot of rework or wastage of resources ultimately. So really, really digging into that decision factors in design, I would highly recommend doing after you understand what you truly can do and what you truly need to do. And then it's all about execution, and really controlled execution. A lot of times I've seen companies really have a solid plan on paper. They have the right partners, team, companies supporting them. But when it comes to execution, things break down, and then the project becomes sort of a nightmare. Or in other cases, when they actually control it really well, they're controlling their own destiny. So would certainly, say controlled execution is the key to get you where you want to get once you know where you want to get. And then comes the continuous sustainment and improvements. The reason why I use the word sustainment here is a lot of times people, forget that, oh, we've already built, so, things will just run on its own and be, perfect forever after that. That's not the case. You do have to continuously invest in sustaining your operations and building them out, whether you do it yourselves or whether you have other partners doing it for you. But it is all about sustainment and improvement. So going into, digging deeper into the framework, the first stuff first, right? Need versus desire. I speak a lot about this, and sort of from a e-commerce operator or retailer perspective, there is a lot of things that weighs into what could be a need for you, may not be a desire for somebody else, and what's desire for you, maybe table stakes for somebody else. So think of it as, are you in the business where shipping or 1-day shipping, 2-day shipping, customer service, how important and how expensive are those? Are you providing value-added services, essentially, through your distribution network? Are there business models? Is your business model evolving constantly? So you were a traditional retailer just selling, a la carte on your e-commerce site, going into a subscription box model, then going into a curated box model, or you have multiple partnerships where you are turning into a marketplace yourself. All of these things make a difference into what your ultimately need is. And then sort of, is your business or your company's mission driven by things like sustainability? You have a commitment to, carbon neutral, goal by a certain date or a certain year. Those things will also add on. How complex is your inventory model? How complex is your assortment? How frequently does it change? All these things will lead into decisions, whether it's around your order management system, warehouse management system, how do you manage inventory within your facilities or your partner facilities, 3PL facilities, as well as, when you look at automation, when you look at those things, these factors will drive those decisions. But truly spending the time you need to spend to truly map out what are the table stakes 5 things, 10 things, what can you live without? What is it that will break your business, or what is it that will make your business, is going to be the true deterministic when you evaluate your ability to execute. Again, these things change from company to company. I can give you an example of a very recent conversation I had with a retailer that has over 200 stores. But in COVID, obviously, things completely changed. 80% of their business used to be first driven by stores. Now 95% is online. And they had to figure out how were they going to, basically meet the business needs of supporting these customers that are buying online. The traditional retail DC wasn't able to support. They were operating their stores as dark stores or fulfillment centers or micro fulfillment centers to do it, but it was breaking their inventory management model. Their assortment planning had gone for a toss. So they had to sort of pivot, and when they sort of ultimately came down and said, these are the 5 things that we really care to keep the customer, and this is how we want to do, then understanding whether they can do it quickly or not became a lot more easier, as opposed to other conversations that I've had with founders of really scaling high growth e-commerce companies, where they see their desire as this is a shiny object that we want to put in our DC, but not understanding does it even meet their use case. So really, truly, I stress upon this point that understanding your need is going to be paramount. And if your desire encompasses your need, perfectly great. If not, you do need to work towards that to make sure whatever you desire at least gets you where you need to be in the first place. Then comes the ability piece. And I use this picture in a way is because sometimes a lot of companies and individuals think that they have the ability to execute like anything, but it is an uphill battle. It is an uphill battle. If you ask anybody that has been in like distribution operations for years, that it's not easy to always execute on time and performance, and without having to manage multiple pieces. It's not, I stress upon to a lot of e-commerce companies, and then it's not just about your financial ability and your financial maturity, whether you can make those CapEx investments or you have the runway to make the OpEx sustainable. But it will come down to, do you have the right team in place? Do you have the right leadership in place? Do you have the resources? If the answer to some of these questions is no, then you're almost better off partnering with other companies that can do it well for you, as opposed to you trying to take on this project of building it on your own. And then comes, if you do decide that you have the ability, then comes, what is the technology portfolio I want to use? What is my order management system going to be? What is my warehouse management system going to be? How is it going to play with the automation that I want in my facility? Do I really even need automation? And if you do, then what is it that you need, right? It's all going to come down to that. And then it's going to come down to also like, are you expecting your business to be same in 3 years or different? Most likely the answer is going to be, it's going to be very different than what it is today. So in those scenarios, I really highly recommend people to think about flexibility when it comes to decision-making and design factors as it sort of comes. So again, right, like understanding your need, then linking it to your ability will guarantee you that you will make at least a decision that you can live with. Whether it's successful or not will depend upon how you actually execute, but at least you will not regret the decision at that point of time. If you don't think about this and you take a really hasty decision that, yes, let's just go do it, and not think through, did you analyze these factors, you may go down the path that might not be the right one for you. So once you have done this analysis and sort of thought through and spent time doing this, then it's a time to make certain decisions and have some design considerations. Again, the traditional way of designing and decision making would be, where am I going to build? What am I going to build? Am I going to outsource? Whether I'm going to insource? It's going to be a combination. What are my constraints? Timeline, cost constraints. What are my throughput constraints? These are all the right ways of looking at it. But then also the additional ways that the companies need to look at it is, what is the technology that will, be with me for the next 3 to 5 years? What is the automation that I need to consider? Is it going to be flexible enough to meet my changing business needs? Or is it going to be so rigid that I cannot make any changes, 6 months down the line, or to make changes is going to take me 3 months. And ultimately, what are the business model factors that you need to factor in for your distribution model? Certain companies are very high touch with their customers. They have specialized packaging, specialized, insert strategy, all of that stuff that drives their business model, or business model drives those decisions that makes distribution a little bit more complex than somebody just throwing in a product in a box and slapping a label on it and shipping it through the door. And depending upon where your constraints are and how fast, ultimately, from a need perspective, you want to be close to your customer, whether you want to provide them 1-day shipping, 2-day shipping, or even 4-hour shipping, right, will determine what technology is best suited for your products. And is it something that you should take on or leverage a combination of third-party networks? The other factor that go into this design considerations are largely going to be driven off of, the returns volume, the seasonality of your business. Those things do definitely impact the cost structure substantially. So you do want to make sure that you have those considerations in there. Obviously, the more data you have to make those decisions, the better decisions it will be, the better design it will be. But one thing that I would say is factor the unexpected. If you're planning to, design for a 3-year runway, design for the worst case as well. Put in, what if I don't grow this fast? Or what if I grow at 60% faster than what I even estimate to be? Or, what if my business model changes? I go from, e-commerce to wholesale. Will the systems work? Will it break? Where it will break? Know those breaking points ahead of time before you start executing. That is what will save you a lot of time, headache, and cost down the road. It is something that most people will not consider upfront, but knowing and having those considerations certainly saved many of my clients headache later. So highly would recommend that. And then what I called executing the build. Once you have a perfect plan on the paper, how are you going to execute it? How are you going to make sure that it's successful? It's sort of a 4-piece approach, right? So you have to balance technology and automation for not only results that you want to achieve now, but also when you scale and continue to scale, and it will continue to perform for you. If you only design for now and not for 3 years, 5 years from now, you will certainly be constrained. The other part of it is, you need to maintain a leadership that's focused on the mission, because if you lose your sight from the mission, and whatever that mission is, whether it's sustainable fulfillment, completely automated fulfillment, growth, or anything, you need to be focused on what that mission you ultimately define it to be. Mission could change over a period of time, certainly, but if you're not focused on it, then you are likely to not meet most of your goals. Again, the other part to this is control. Maintaining tight control, a grip on your timeline, budget, scope is going to be probably lead to whether you will make it on time and in budget, but also at the same time, will you meet your customer promise or promises that you have made to your organization? There are several examples where things could go haywire. Meaning, if you're building a greenfield project, permitting is never guaranteed that you'll have it in one go. You may not. You may take a while to get all your designs done, or materials show up. Those are sort of probably the constraints outside of your control. But having a rigid sort of process around it that helps you identify those issues ahead of time and continue to solve for it will probably give you the best control you need in terms of execution. And then it's the stability in the sense if you're agile and if you can, as you see issues, and you sort of tackle them ahead as opposed to being always reactive, that's what is ultimately going to give you the most stability as a team, as an organization, as a implementation throughout. And this will also help your partners, your integrators, your WMS providers, your automation providers, your 3PL partners even, be sort of like fully guided in the process, because your agility will allow for any changes that they might happen on their end, and ultimately will keep everything together. So truly, in a few words, where this sort of recipe for success comes is not just, it's not a one-person success. It's always team. It's always the leadership that you provide. It's always the people that execute upon it. But ultimately, finding that right balance between technology, people, process will help you get that success sooner rather than later. And then, once you are past that phase of implementation, it's not to lose focus, right? You have to continue to focus. You have to continue to look for those opportunities that will improve your operations to reach that, or be as close to your max throughput as possible when you need to. You will have to continue to invest resources that will help you innovate, whether it's people, technology, or even physical infrastructure, right? You do have to make those investments and just to even upkeep. And then sort of, continue to keep your infrastructure. When I say infrastructure, I mean the same things of people, technology, as well as physical infrastructure, flexible, so that you can adapt to more changes as they come, or you can scale as you need. If another COVID hits, or if another event like this happens, if you didn't build that flexibility in now, then you'll be again left behind the curve. So again, sort of like, the premise of building this e-commerce fulfillment network, I go back to the first and foremost fundamental thinking that you need to put together is sort of understand what's your need, understand what's your ability, link the two, then make the decision. Based off of that decision, design your processes, keeping a lot of flexibility in place, and then do a very controlled execution. Once you are up and running with this, then comes the time to continuously improve and invest. With that, I would say thank you for your time. Certainly feel free to reach out to me for any questions, or happy to have many more conversations with people.
Hey, Krutin, before we start with a couple of Q&A, since you just invited people to reach out, do you want to give them your email address?
Yes, my email address is krutin@n2partners.com. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. You on your last slide, you had a section there on automation, and at the facility that you did with Adore Me, it was a highly automated facility. So startups are going to face that question about whether to automate, not to automate. It's going to be driven by a lot of factors. Some might be around, going to the customer service promise. Some might be geographical factors. What led to the automation that you implemented in Jersey City?
So a lot of our decisions were based off of Adore Me was scaling very fast. The growth was very rapid, and with that growth came a lot of challenges, right? So a lot of our automation decisions were made based off that growth. Again, similarly, if I fast forward now to today's time, companies have a lot more options or even models that they can use to automate. And the beauty has been that, now they've even become more flexible. Not everything requires massive CapEx investment. Some have, what they call robotics as a service models. Some offer a combination of play. You can lease to buy, all of those kind of stuff, right? So it's definitely a lot more flexible this way, but also some of these technologies are now much more easier to implement. So, but that also brings you a very difficult question, is that now you have too many options to pick from. It's a complex marketplace in that sense, right? So definitely, if you understand your use cases very well, then it's a lot easier to go after what automation or what technology will work for you better, as opposed to not understanding that.
A second thing related to inside the four walls. I remember when you and I first spoke that even though in e-commerce returns and in e-commerce apparel returns can be 30% of your orders, in your case with the product that Adore Me was selling, returns weren't a big deal. But you were then going to do a subscription model, right, where people would get a box, a curated box with like 5 or 8 items where they could keep 1 and return 7. So if you were doing a startup today, I know it's going to depend on the vertical, but how would you build in returns? And what would be your advice to a startup in terms of considering returns when they're doing their design?
Yeah, great question. So returns was not a big problem in the past, at least for my experience at Adore Me. But fast forward in the last 3 months, 6 months, a lot of companies, e-commerce players that I talk to, they're increasingly seeing a lot of returns, right? So the returns is sort of that painful aspect of your P&L that eats up your bottom line very fast and doesn't necessarily, and sometimes it's necessary because that's what you've told customers, that's your return policy, etc. So building that in design as flexible worst case scenario, that if you went to a certain percentage returns, will definitely allow you, but it will also allow you to build processes that are a lot more agile. So a lot of companies now look at return goods going directly into forward pick areas, so you can start picking from it as long as they're in the right condition, etc. Right? That would have to be sort of part of your design consideration, as opposed to being an afterthought. If it's an afterthought, then it's a lot more expensive afterthought than if it's part of your upfront design.
One last question. So you had one facility, and one facility was basically handling the U.S. But as people are now moving towards next day, same day, and whatever, one of the things that we're seeing is this introduction of these like micro-fulfillment centers, meaning there's a couple of startups who are putting in 3,000 square foot facilities in a strip plaza in Omaha, to serve next day delivery or even same day delivery in Omaha. And I know some startup apparel companies, for instance, are taking advantage of that model to offer their services. One, have you looked into those, just from your research? And how do you see that market evolving, and how does it apply to startups? And that's my last question.
I've looked into it in a lot of detail in the recent few months. One thing that's very interesting is it offers you that ability to sort of mimic the Amazon factor and sort of compete with it. It certainly, you do have to weigh in your cost considerations, but where it sort of changes from company to company is what is your inventory model, right? And what is your assortment model? Are you using it only for part of your assortment? Or are you using it for your full assortment? Because, when you have 1, 2, 3, 4 locations, it's relatively easier to sort of, plan and do inventory planning and inventory movements across these DCs or nodes. But when you start to have 25 micro-fulfillment centers, then it becomes a lot more complex to sort of manage inventory at these individual locations and then continue to do order allocation across them. But certainly something that I see a lot of companies very curiously looking at. Some are experimenting for sure, and others are waiting to see how the experimentations of market movers happen, and then they will jump into it. But definitely a space that will continue to grow, I think, in the next 2 to 3 years.
Great. Thank you, Krutin. That brings us to the end of the conference, or in the immortal words of Porky Pig, that's all, folks. I want to thank all of the great presenters who shared their experiences, particularly Krutin, who just wrapped up for us, and shared their insights with us. And thank all of you, our attendees, for sharing your time with us. Brian, any final thoughts?
Yes, thanks to all the presenters, attendees, and sponsors for this week's event. We had a curveball thrown at us this year, having to change our format to virtual. But thanks to all of you, we still had a fantastic conference. Our exhibit hall will remain open until 2:30 Central today, so there's still time to connect with exhibitors. And also, it would be really helpful if you could take a moment and fill out the survey that's located at the top right-hand page side of the lobby. We'd love to get your thoughts and suggestions about the conference. Hope to see you all again next year. Thanks again.